Okay, I've got my chenille and mercerized cotton samples wet finished and pressed, and I think that I have trimmed all the tails, though it never hurts to double check things. So let's see what we've got now in terms of how much things shrank, how the fabric changed, and drapeability. So the first thing I want to show you is I wrote up a little more neatly this time all my colors and how big stripes were, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. I wrote down my pre-washing sizes, length, width by length, and then I wrote down my post-washing sizes. So let's see what we've got here. And again, in case I have not made this point firmly enough, which is a joke, um, what you learn from samples is invaluable. So I was working with, oh, see, there's a little tail. And I just grab my little snips and clip close to, but not into the fabric. Okay, so with my chenilles, I was working with some mystery fibers. So for instance, this variegated colorway, someone gave me, and I don't know what the fiber content is. And before I pressed my samples, this had ruched in the fabric. It had not shrunk because I was able to press it back out, but it just had kind of gathered everything. And I didn't know that before I wove a sample, measured it, wrote down the measurements, and then wet finished it. And so knowing that this is going to ruche can become a design element for me. Something else you notice right away when you look at this top sample. So this is the first sample I wove at 12 ends per inch. I used a chenille, a mystery chenille, two mystery chenilles, and then a rayon chenille that I knew I'd gotten from Webb's because I just got it. And then sorry, I have that backwards. Um, this is the chenille I did know what was happening with, the one I got from Webb's. This one and this one were mystery fibers. And then I used 3-2 cotton. And so notice something that's going on. And I took measurements of this after it came out of the wash. And remember that I wet finished by soaking for about 20 minutes, half an hour. Then I rolled in a towel, all the samples together, rolled in a towel, let it sit for half an hour, then put it in the dryer, checked it religiously every 5 minutes. And as usual, 15 minutes was the Goldilocks zone. It produced a fabric that was still damp. It produced um, a certain amount of, I'm going to call it finish for lack of a better word. And I did not want to try and reduce the chenille parts any further because, as you can see, it did shrink. So this sample started off at 13 and a half inches wide. And then after I took it out of the dryer, the chenille portions had shrunk down to 11.75. And the cotton portion with cotton weft, cotton on cotton, had not shrunk much at all. It had shrunk an inch, but not nearly as much as the chenille. So that was the first thing I learned. A second thing I learned is yes, it is always smart to hem stitch your samples, but don't trim the tails so much. About an inch and a half is kind of the minimum you want your tails to be after hem stitching so that they don't start to, oh, this is the wrong one. It's a different sample. This is the one where I just knotted the fringe and trimmed it, and this did not come out. So what are we seeing about drape and hand and overall, well, drape is hand, but just the overall feel of the fabric at 12 ends per inch? What I see is a goodly amount of drape, but it's a little bit stiff. And of course, I'm holding it by the cotton, and so that might be affecting what I'm seeing too. Um, the chenille part feels good to me, feels really good to me. Uh, with 3-2 cotton. And when I close my eyes which you can't see, but I promise you I close my eyes. When I close my eyes and pet it, this part does feel like the velvety chenille that I want and expect to see. And of course, the cotton part is nice and soft, but it feels like cotton. It doesn't feel like velvet, and one wouldn't expect it to. But when because I'm blending two yarns of very different fibers and very different textures, because remember that chenille has this built-in fuzz to it. It's good to know that I can produce a fabric that feels the way I wanted it to feel, even though it's a blend of chenille and cotton. So that is sample number one. Okay, sample number two, this was the one I wove at 8 ends per inch. Oh, and this is the one where I hem stitched it and then I trimmed off the warp too short, and some of my hem stitching is actually falling out. It's on this other side. So leave yourself at least 1.5 inches of warp after you as you trim for your hem stitching. Okay, so this one, I did all chenille weft in different colors, and I wrote down the colors. And again, I used this mystery fiber and this mystery fiber, this mystery chenille. And again, the multi really pulled in and it was able to be manipulated. But you can see you have one chance to restretch fabric when it has unintentionally ruched on you, like you weren't planning for it to fold up on itself. And that's while it's still wet. And I was not aggressive about stretching. Um, and so there's still a little bit of draw in up here and over here on the multi sections that is not present with any of the other chenille. So again, now I know this, and it can, if I so choose, become a design feature. So at 8 ends per inch, this fabric is really lightweight, and yet I know for a fact that it's going to be really warm because that's just how chenille works. It's a kind of a super insulator, but you can see through it. I mean, you can actually, well, okay, see if I can get this on camera. I mean, it's kind of see-through, and that might not be what I want, even though it feels like velvet. It the way I want this blanket to feel. So, third time's the charm for Goldilocks, as in life. And this is my 10 ends per inch sample. Again, all with chenille weft. Oh, I forgot to talk about the dimensions. Okay, so the 8 ends per inch one went from 18.5 wide to 14 wide. That was a lot of shrinkage, but it did not shrink at all in the length with the cotton warp, which is pretty interesting. And again, I had to work at the multi to get it to unruche, unruffle. On this 10 ends per inch, it went from 12.25 down to 10.5, and it lost a little bit more in the length. So what are all these numbers for? What are they telling me is probably the big takeaway here. And what they're telling me is this 8 dent, though it feels great, is perhaps a little too flimsy for something that can get the wear and tear, the use of a throw. And if it were something that, for instance, a little kid were using, or somebody wanted a blanket for their dog's bed or something, I would never go this flimsy because it would just not hold up. The amount of shrinkage that I see in the width tells me how good my beat is, and basically how much space both yarns, the warp and the weft yarns, have to move. And that's pretty important when you're trying to account for shrinkage and you want something that doesn't feel like a board but feels like something cuddly and snuggly and wonderful, which is what I want this blanket to be. So the fact that I lost almost 2 inches at the 10 inch and almost 2 inches at the 12-inch tells me that these are closer to the mark for what I'm going to want. And the length also shrank is a good indicator. Now, it's possible that if I wet the 8 ends per inch some more and dried it some more in the dryer with a damp towel, I'd get a different result. But what my gut was telling me when I was weaving this 10 ends per inch was that 10 was probably going to be a reasonably good number. And in fact, it does feel like velvet, but it doesn't have quite as much stiffness as the 12 ends per inch did. And it has a little bit of stretch, and let's see how it puddles. So when Jane Stafford uh, evaluates fabric that she's woven, she puddles it to see basically to see how quickly it kind of collapses on itself. And this doesn't puddle as much as, say, a silk scarf, but I want it to be a blanket. I want it to kind of feel like it's got some heft to it without being overwhelming. I want it to feel soft and snuggly and cuddly, and that's what I'm getting with this fabric, even with a 3-2 cotton warp mixed with the chenille. So I know all this now in a way that I simply could not have found out any other way. There is no reference guide on earth that will tell you what your fabric's going to feel like after it's wet finishing. It's just not possible. You have to weave it for yourself. You have to test it for yourself. You have to wet finish it for yourself and see how it all goes. So I now have a bunch of samples to mail to my friend, and I know how I'm going to want to set it. She doesn't need to know, um, unless it turns out she's got really strong feelings about the softness and snuggliness of one over the other, and then that will become a factor in what I ultimately decide to do. But what she can really do is see how, pull this so you can see my warp colors compared to my weft colors. So I did iris, navy, 5-2 navy, and this time I doubled it. Iris, Webb's navy in 3-2, iris, 5-2 navy, and then iris again. And you can see how in each patch of weft color changes, you're also getting a different color interaction. And I feel that this is really important because I think that, and I know this because when my friend and I were talking last weekend, I was trying to sketch out for her how the blocks of color would go. And she's just not a weaver. It, it just like saying to somebody, "Oh, I'll make this dress for you, but I'll make it out of this fabric and this color instead of the fabric and color that the designer chose for the art photo, for the glamour shot photo on the pattern front." And I used to do that all the time when I was younger, and it's just really hard for people unless they are also sewists or weavers or knitters or crocheters to just kind of visualize what on earth you're talking about. So when I send this to her, uh, she will be able to lay it on her couch and go, "Oh, so this is what you were talking about with color interaction, that this blue looks different from this blue, looks different from this that looks more like purple, even though they're all the same weft because of the warp stripes." So this is going to give us both a lot of information, and the next, after she gets these and makes some, it lays them on the couch, sees how they look in the room, we can have another discussion. And if it turns out that what we decide is, you know what, chenille's nice, but a fluffy, puffy, organic cotton, slub cotton would work better, then at least we know. And I haven't spent a whole ton of time weaving a blanket for her that she doesn't like. So this is why we sample, and I hope this has been illuminating for you. If I haven't yet convinced you that sampling it can be an end in and of itself, not, but it is absolutely positively also a necessary foundation before you warp something on the loom.